Hi, I'm Mark Montgomery. I'm founder and CEO of KYield. I recently published a white paper that was titled The Value Proposition of KOS. That's our operating system, AI enhanced operating system, enterprise-wide, that I developed actually from the theorem stage in our lab at the time in Northern Arizona. For the past 12 years, we've been in New Mexico via the Bay Area. And this photo behind me here is actually on top of New Mexico on Wheeler Peak, which is one of our favorite getaways. Actually, our favorite getaway in New Mexico is we like to go up to the Tahoe Ski Valley, which is off my shoulder over here, and do hiking in the summertime, skiing in the winter, beautiful in the fall as well. So let's go ahead and get started here. Share my screen. This is an old diagram since New Mexico. Again, this is 25 years of R&D. In the past few years, it's become technically viable. And so now we're at the point of, I've had the opportunity to engage with a fair percentage of the world's largest organizations, the senior management teams on enterprise artificial intelligence over the past few years. And this is just a diagram that shows, since we've been in New Mexico, the focus on in research on nature. So it's inspired by nature and managed by humans. That's one of our taglines. That's certainly accurate. And so the KOS that has four primary embedded functions. And this just displays a few of the individual components of each. Governance is very important. It was designed in from the KOS from the beginning. In the KOS from the beginning, I thought it was obvious, but we haven't really heard about it in AI systems until the past 2 or 3 years. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. A lot of the emphasis in artificial intelligence. Our lab was actually a knowledge systems lab. I was running multiple networks where this started. And so it was after a decade of management consulting and operating several businesses of our own and for others, governance was obvious to me, and you needed highly structured data across the system. So a core part of its patented system is data management. So it's data management that is specifically optimized for being enhanced with artificial intelligence. So it augments the entire enterprise, but you obviously need very strong governance, right? And so you hear a lot about that in the media and social media, and consulting firms talk about the need for governance. Well, when you're talking about an enterprise-wide system, governance needs to be embedded in that system itself. Sure, you do need committees and you need consultants, but if it doesn't have the physical ability to execute the governance, it doesn't matter. And that's the primary problem in enterprise AI today. A lot of companies, organizations, governments have adopted principles for enterprise systems that don't even have the ability to execute those principles. So we've put up principles on our website. You can find them quite easily with a three-part video interview that goes along with it. So governance is very important. It's also important to have it easy for senior management to be able to administer. So it's all of our modules. It's a modular system. We have a natural language interface. And the governance actually has quite a bit involved. We have a certification process, but the big issues to understand is that it's enterprise-wide for the whole system that goes to every entity. Every employee has a module in the system, and it has a natural language, easy-to-use interface. And among other things, it enables the access and security parameters, who has access, and also the ability to extend the system to partners and customers. And you'll see why that's important a little bit later on. So another very important aspect from very early on, 25 years ago, was security, and that has become ever more important as time has gone on. So we have actually an extensive research effort in security over the years, what I call data physics. And so there's multiple types of security. We have data-centric security, which is more well-known and more well understood. However, it's based on extremely high structured data in the system. So that's one of the nice things about having an enterprise-wide refined system, is that the data that's created and populated in the system is controlled by the organization. The customer owns it all the time. It has built-in security and privacy, but that allows you to do many things. So another thing that we have for the highest security areas is we have our own proprietary language that is a symbolic AI, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And also the deep relationship analytics, behavioral analytics in the system allows us to provide an extra layer of security there. Prevention is another really important area. Multiple types of preventions that we go after. We've had the opportunity to study most of the major catastrophes over the past 25 years, including both in government, systemic financial crisis, 9/11, those kinds of major events, the pandemic, and then also many of the individual corporate and industrial catastrophes. We've engaged on deep dives with the companies that were involved. I won't name any names today, but it includes several of the largest. Basically, the thing to know here is that while it may seem like large corporate catastrophes are low risk for any individual company or individual management team, and they may think that all of their risk management is in place, I'm here to tell you that the same was thought by the senior management teams in all of the companies that experience major catastrophes. The good news is that with the modern state-of-the-art technology, most, if not all, of those major catastrophes were preventable. Today, they would be preventable. Some of them weren't at the time, but they would be today. However, you must have the right architecture, the right system in place to be able to physically prevent those. And so this includes industrial accidents, intentional fraud, the insider risk, and then also certain types of cyber breaches, enterprise-wide and individual behavioral analytics. And then the last but not least is productivity, enhanced productivity. And productivity, the word here I'm using is a fairly broad meaning in that productivity across the enterprise in areas, for example, that delves deep down to the molecular level is necessary. We're talking about accelerated R&D in big pharma. That's one of the areas that we've really had deep dives in for very specific drug development, accelerated R&D in other industries, and tailored to each entity. So this is a universal system. The data doesn't really care what your specialty is. The important thing is that the company and the individuals can describe what it is in specific enough language so that the system has the ability to optimize that. And one of the ways we do that is with tailored to each entity is prescient search. So each individual has their own module. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but that allows, for example, proactive search, not just reactive and research. Organizations spend an enormous amount of time and energy searching for things that have already existed. But this is actually the prescient search is a constant proactive effort throughout the KOS to be able to deliver the right kind of information that they have an interest in coming up. The same is true with prevention that I'll go into a little detail later. So those are the four main areas that are embedded in the system. So the most important thing to understand at this point on the architecture is that you need the data, the intel, the deep intel that's provided by the structured data to be able to operate efficiently across the enterprise and compete with other very sophisticated organizations. And we'll get into that in a minute and you'll see why. And then you can drill down as far as you need to. So we focus on the 80% of the functions that are universal to any organization. And then the individual data science teams can use this highly structured data that's accurate from the source and to drill down to any level they need, or whether it's internal teams, external, et cetera. So here is the problem and the challenge. This shows productivity growth that is patterned after actual companies that we've engaged with, and it shows we're starting really from enterprise-wide AI systems. I'm starting from 2018. Yeah, there were some efforts before that, but not much. And really, there's really very few true enterprise-wide AI systems today. But we are at the point of rapid scaling, and that is the new bar, and that is setting the new standard by which everyone else must compete because of, on the top line, you'll see the superstar firms. So there's a very small group of companies. They're large and they're growing with the exception of a few sort of startups, although you could argue with that definition because in most cases they're large startups and very well funded. But again, one of the commonalities between these superstar firms is that they're very well networked. They have strong data governance and data management systems across the enterprise, and they are making smart investments and applications in artificial intelligence. And as you can see, the trend, what happened in 2020 was an anomaly. It's never occurred in history, but a small group of companies, in part because of the lockdowns and the pandemic, they grew revenue by over $1 trillion. Now, that's just an astounding number. That's never occurred in human history. And that is powered by networks. They had invested beforehand to be able to exploit the opportunity when it came along. And that is, again, that's the standard, that the bar that must be met today, because those companies are expanding market share and revenue share, really what I call now, they're not even talking about their fair share of the market. Really, it's about what is their fair share of the total economy. And that fair share of the total economy, or that share of the economy, is growing at a very rapid rate at the expense of everyone else. So you obviously want to be in either, if you can't achieve superstar status, you certainly want to achieve leadership status. So in the green, you can see that that those are the companies that are really creating and grabbing the future currently, as we speak. So in the chart that you show in 2022, it kind of comes back together a little bit before spreading again. And that is the post-pandemic recovery and expected boom. Now we've had some other things that have happened and since I did this last year, but it still nevertheless, I think, is generally on the forecast here is accurate. So you don't want to be a laggard. Laggards are headed for extinction. If you apply basic accounting principles to this on the laggard, you can clearly see that those organizations are not going to. This applies to public sector and private sector, by the way. So here's an old diagram I wanted to share, one of the original diagrams that we had of the system, and what I call the integrated semantic neural network. So that has, essentially meaning and in context throughout the whole organization that allows enterprise-wide, it's human-powered cognitive operating system. And so this was actually for about 20 years ago, and a lot of the terminology that you hear companies in promoting in fact, some of the biggest companies, was from our work in 20, 25 years ago. We didn't get the fame, but our work is good and our systems are, I think, probably among the best in the world, if not the best in the world. So the underlying theorem here is yield management of knowledge, and that is a mathematical theorem I didn't formalize until just a few years ago. But you have to have the detailed data structure in your enterprise to be able to do it. And every file in the system has ratings. So every entity, every file, it's a mathematically based system. And that's what enables things like maintaining the quality and in quantity in what I call the data management system, the ability to manage the knowledge yield curve. So here, this is an old diagram here, the industrial yield management of knowledge. This shows a CKO engine, basic, but that's the core patented system. Just wanted to share that real quick. This is from a white paper that I'm going to, or actually an article that was recently published that was accepted quite well, that I'm going to show you in a minute and we'll discuss. But this is the goal of our KOS for customers. So yes, individually, we're providing governance and we're preventing crises and we're enhancing productivity and we're providing security so that it's a more productive and secure operation that's smarter and a continuously learning loop. But the goal is to achieve the KALO. So you want to achieve the status of a KALO. And that is a continuously adaptive learning organization. So there's no perfect, pure KALO in the world, but if you look at the superstar firms in the highest performing organizations in the world, they are the ones that are closer to achieving a perfect KALO. So if you were going to break it down numerically, you might say, okay, well, the average organization might have a KALO of 50% or 55%, because there's a lot of rent-seeking cultures out there. Some of them make a lot of money, but they're not growing and they're not learning. So the first time that there's some sort of shift in the economy, they're in trouble. And those are the type of organizations that can be disrupted. So this is the goal, shows again the CKO engine up here, and for the entire organization. And then data, which is the individual module, is the digital assistant with neuroanatomical analytics. And that gives you an idea how far down we can break it down. I'll talk about in medicine, for example, personalized medicine was one of the first use cases that we had in mind. In fact, the original KYield system was inspired and motivated by discovering that my brother had been diagnosed with ALS. So I was doing a lot of research in methods that might help him. Unfortunately, at the time, it was a very complex disease, still is, of course, but there was really no help for any ALS patients during that time frame. But today, a lot of things are happening in accelerated discovery. So that was one of the early motivations. Here's another way of looking at it. This is another diagram that shows the KALO. And up here in this upper left-hand corner is our core patented that has the customer module, or the individual module, or that can be extended to customers, or the individual worker, the K worker here in the CKO engine. And then the rest is various methodology across the organization that's integrated with other systems and uses open source and proprietary systems. And that is, to create a KALO with your whole tech stack so that it's a continuously learning loop. And that's really where the competitive bar is today. So if your company or organization isn't doing a good job on that, frankly, your future looks bleak. You're going to need, your individuals are going to need to do it, and your organization is going to need to do it, because that's that's who's gobbling up the economy. Those companies are doing a better job. So visualized networks has been in our architecture from day one. We actually have a senior engineer working on a turnkey system now, and this is just recent sort of happy accidents that came out of that work he's doing, and it includes very again highly structured data. Allows us to do link graphs for the entire ecosystem. The facilities, so it could be a global multinational, so you could have this on a map and showing facilities, and it's clickable, so you can break down into the the regional business units, that sort of thing. Knowledge maps is one that I've been studying and playing with for the entire time. Today's knowledge maps are quite sophisticated. And an ability to break down whether it's internally in your organization or your entire ecosystem. Every individual has one. And then again, prescient search that is proactive and linked to the actual delivers it on the dashboard. And so that gives you an idea of everything is visualized, right? And that helps with especially some types of people. I'm very visual, and I like to have things visualized. It's not the only method we use, but it's a powerful method. Here's an old dashboard. Some of you may have seen this before. I've used it. We're actually in the process of rebuilding with the most modern technology, a new dashboards. I'm not even sure we should be calling them dashboards today. There's a lot of debate about that. I think there's some good points either way. But basically what we're talking about here is data that's tailored to the individual. And in this case, it's me. And I was playing around with this a few years ago just to refine the system and architecture. But a few things that I'll just point out real quickly here. First of all, along the top is the prevention capability. So that is multiple types of priority. The system automatically finds risks, automatically delivers it to the right people, again, based on highly structured, accurate information from the source, and in multiple layers of security. So it gets to the right risk to the right people at the right time. That's the goal here. And then we also, it requires action. So one of the commonalities in major catastrophes is that oftentimes experts will flag risks. They will have their products, their memos, their papers, etc., in the enterprise system, and it sits there, which is exactly what happened with 9/11 and the famous Phoenix memo. Very detailed memo, had individuals who were on those planes and warned about the risk of using those jet airplanes that they were training for as weapons. And that's set on the FBI servers for weeks before 9/11 occurred, right? And the bureaucracy, for a variety of different reasons, in each case is different, didn't act on it in time. So there you had a highly rated expert, anti-terrorist expert. That was his job. He used the system in place did it by the book, and still the bureaucracy did not act in time. And it wasn't shared. So out of the 9/11 Commission, that's one of the things that was corrected. Of course, the government spent tens of billions of dollars on it, which much of which was probably unnecessary. But from what I understand, that particular problem has been fixed. The right information is shared with the right entities, local and other intelligence agencies, et cetera. But this it gives you an idea of how much we put into one dashboard is a lot of power here. Here's a knowledge map and my network at the time. So we'd be able to click on each of these, and there's different versions of that for different reasons. Here I have a stream from prescient search on my interests. We have artificial intelligence. In this case, these are actual articles that were in journals that the system picked up and highlighted for me that based on the intel that I provided in my module and my data module, And then another area that I'm interested in economics. Those that follow me on LinkedIn know that these are the two primary areas that I have decades of interest in research going back. So this is tailored to me. And over here we have a data tuner, which is part of the core patented system that allows me to increase quality and decrease quality or decrease quantity. If I have an important project coming up, I can slow down the quantity of data and information. I can take rests except for the highest priority areas like prevention. I can never turn that off in the system. But if I have a really important project coming up, a deadline, I can use that to increase the quality, data quality, information, my consumption of information. And so I have some metrics here on my own productivity that are here, a bunch of video news feeds that are integrated, and then some social networking type things that I can communicate with my network down here. So integrated communication. So that just gives you, that's just one page of a multi-page dashboard. But as you can see, it's powerful functionality. And here is I talked about the healthcare system a little while ago. The first paper that we actually published was on patient-centric health management, and it was a diabetes use case scenario in 2010. And the main actor in this, the main character is an American scientist who had diabetes, and I patterned after some real people that I know without change the names to protect the innocent, but it's fairly futuristic at the time of what can be done. The good news about this, I mean, it's been 8 to 10 million downloads on this paper. The good news is that a lot of what was in that system is no longer futuristic, and it's starting to be adopted. So that is the direction that we're going, right? Whether it's inside a corporation, inside a government entity, the individuals on their own for their own purposes, we can integrate healthcare apps into the data module. And so they'll be able to not only, it's holistic, right, in nature. So I'm not only just learning about my work and my productivity, but if I'm a really, an organization that really cares about employees, or it could be a contractor network, a small business network, whatever it is, but you can actually provide the ability to do setup for precision healthcare that's tailored to me, and the patient remains in control. The modules, it can be extended to physicians and the care team, but this is very patient-centric, based on my own research dating back to what I described earlier with my brother in ALS. So another recent, I'm not showing all the different use cases. Each industry is different. We go down and we've done deep dives in every major industry. But I'm just talking about some of the broad, functions that you can do. Another area that we're focused on recently is ESG. As many of you know, environmental, social, and governance, there is a big problem with ESG in that about $35 trillion is already being invested in companies that claim to be ESG companies. Now, many of them no doubt are. The problem is that the rating systems are far from perfect, and in part because the data is imperfect. It's not collected well. There's not a lot of discipline in it. And so we had a problem with companies that are claiming to be ESG and hiring consultants that give them a higher rating. That turned out to be, when others did an audit of it, turned out to be false claims. And then in other cases, we have companies that have invested heavily that are not being, and doing a good job, they're not being credited. So what we can do with this enterprise-wide system, and this is very similar to a HUMCAT that I pioneered a few years ago, which is prevention of human-caused crises. This is the same structure, the same architecture for a slightly different purpose. So it's still prevention of human-caused catastrophes, but it's on a sort of global scale, right? In one enterprise at a time. And since we have such good, highly structured data across the entire enterprise, it's relatively easy for us, and it was designed that way, to integrate with sensors and ESG sensors, for example, that can tell us exactly what the emissions are. And so those companies, it aligns interests, it provides the right type of incentives, and it makes the whole thing credible. And so this is really important because currently, as I'm speaking now, the SEC has drawn up new regulations. And right now they're struggling with Scope 3 guidance. Well, Scope 2 is for the enterprise, but as has been pointed out, that's insufficient, because if you have one company that's often cited, and this is Apple, Apple could have a very good ESG record, and they could look wonderful if they're not including their supply chain, because their supply chain, all their suppliers are mostly in different countries, and they could be polluting those environments heavily. But they're not inside of Apple, right? They're external. So Scope 3 includes the entire ecosystem. And in some countries and states are already requiring that companies have Scope 3 guidance. So our system, the KOS, is ideal for Scope 3. Essentially, that's the message here. And the other main thing, our HumpCat did the same thing. You can bundle with ESG projects for green bonds, for qualified projects. And we have I'm actually in direct contact with organizations that manage, I think it's close to about $50 trillion. And most of them have ESG, active ESG investment programs. And they're always looking for good projects to invest in. And so we can work with customers on that to be able to do that. And finally, on ESG, the accelerating discovery that's in their productivity can help, and that's human augmented, right? So it's a combination of automated accelerated discovery with our algorithms, and also the human teams involved to come up with better ways to accelerate discovery and new methods. That could be in deep R&D, deep tech, new ways that are cleaner, manufacturing, new inventions, that kind of thing, or it can be just new methods and behaviors. So this is an exciting new thing that we can provide. We actually have several of those projects, ESG projects, at different phases right currently. So this is an article that I discussed earlier. I mentioned that is up on Cognitive World. You can read the entire article. It's one of the featured articles at Cognitive World. And this has been received well. It's been mentioned in the press a couple of times, quoted. The top 10 obstacles to successful enterprise AI. This is based on my actual experience with hundreds of organizations, including dozens of the largest organizations in the world. Excuse me, it's been over a decade now. So most of it has been the past 5-6 years, but so this is actual experience and observations. So in the quote up here, in order to remain competitive, companies need to rapidly transition from ML projects to refined enterprise AI systems. So the problem is about 2014, you started seeing the consulting firms recognize, it was growing, AI was growing very fast because of the machine learning breakthroughs earlier, 2012-ish. And companies were investing a lot of money, investors were investing a lot of money. So consultants, of course, jumped on the bandwagon. One, they saw a big opportunity for their own firms, but also their clients needed to learn. It's a steep learning curve for everybody, including the consulting firms, right? It just so happens I've been doing it for 25 years. Most haven't, but it is a very steep learning curve for anybody. And their advice, which is normally good for software at the time, was start small, learn as you go, and then expand from there. The problem is that's not what the superstar firms did. The superstar firms invested heavily, they invested boldly, and they've captured enormous share of the economy since. So those shared customers, clients with the consulting firms, that started off with ML projects. Some of those ML projects made a good ROI, but very few even moved the needle in becoming a competitive company, right? And so, in fact, many of those companies are in the process or already have gone out of business that were doing these ML projects. And so I'm going to run down quickly through these top 10 obstacles that we run into. Executive champions are rare. Part of that a few years ago was, of course, you didn't find too many CEOs that had spent thousands of hours studying artificial intelligence. So they just didn't have the ability to be able to even recognize the difference between quality and not. So they didn't know who was giving them good advice or not. That was a big part of the problem. A lot of them are highly intelligent, but they're very busy. And so we, for example, have thousands of senior executives on our newsletters that have taken all of our work. There's been a major effort in education to increase the knowledge on artificial intelligence since then. So that has improved a lot, but it's still true that executive champions are rare. And sort of an extension of that is that in our system, since it's enterprise-wide, it really should be a team effort led by the CEO. Impacts every part of the organization, but you might have, for example, a president or a CIO or CTO who is more technically expert that wants to lead it. And so the CEO gives the approval and they're a champion, but it's led by somebody else. That's fine. It varies in every organization, but you do clearly need an executive champion. And if you look at those companies that are successful versus those that aren't, they typically have a CEO that is quite aggressive in AI and investing heavily in it. So 2, culture still eats strategy. There again, if you look at the companies that are doing well versus those that aren't, you can identify fairly clearly culture is the reason. It's not, in many cases, it's not knowledge, it's not talent, it's the culture within the organization. 3, confusing projects with systems. So the problem with the ML projects is that they're not operational. You can't scale most of those. And that's what we've been working on for 25 years. You really need a scalable, highly refined AI system in place that is collecting the relevant, accurate data, and then build your ML projects on top of it. So you can look at it in a way from middleware, from in between ML projects and an AI infrastructure, let's say cloud infrastructure. You need a layer. Some have called it semantic layer. I don't think that does justice to it. You really need an operational system, an OS across the whole organization. In fact, Walmart, the CEO of Walmart, who was also on our list, as many others, in 2017, after being, having difficulty competing with Amazon, which was very networked and applying machine learning across their network, I published an article that said every company needs a new type of operating system that is augmented with AI. And not long after that, the CEO of Walmart came out and said, we need a new operating system. And they've had quite a bit of success in doing that against Amazon and transforming their company, as have others. So it's important to not confuse projects with systems, scalable systems. That's really important. 4, assuming big is better. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but that is a false assumption. A couple of things I'll just quickly point out. One is, as we've seen the last couple of years, major systemic cybersecurity problems. So big becomes actually existential risk, not just for a company, but across the economy when they become too big. So on a security basis, I can tell you for a fact, without any reservations, that big is not better. And especially in terms of existential risk. We can do things that they can't in a smaller company. For example, our proprietary language that isn't released. We have very few people in the world that are even aware of it. It's still a work in progress, but that is an example where in a large organization, you can't compartmentalize that down. That is one area. Another area is competitiveness. If you have a big commoditized company, let's say big tech company, by necessity, when they roll out new products, it is available for everybody in the entire world. By definition, that means you're not getting a competitive advantage. So you need a competitive advantage. You either need to do a custom internal project, or you need to work with a company like ours that isn't scaled widely yet, that the whole world doesn't have. Otherwise, you can't get it. Now, one of the things that people don't understand, I call it the dilemma, because the competitiveness, you get cheaper costs and scale, at least in some companies. Some companies you don't, you're just paying more for commoditization, but you're not getting competitive advantage. And so you really need to understand that the dynamics of of what's going on there with the big tech. There's a lot of false assumptions on it. I've published a few papers if you want to visit our website to go into more detail. I don't want to spend too much time out of here, but number 5, failure to operationalize. That was a lot of these projects. In fact, the majority were never operationalized. So they were looked at as research projects, academic projects. And so that essentially is the difference between a refined, scalable, viable system like ours versus projects, right? Makes all the difference in the world. Enterprise-wide versus, sort of siloed projects. Redundancy is prevalent. I'll briefly talk about, one of the largest banks in the world that we engaged with for several months. I was able to see this up front in personal, so to speak. And after about 6 months, I was able to make what I think is a pretty good estimate that about 40% of their effort, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on large custom AI systems internally, variety of different types of systems, about 40% of that is redundant, so it's wasted. And in their case, they just refuse to work with any external vendors. They want to do it all internally. And that jumps to number 8 is just the NIH syndrome, the not invented here syndrome. That's one of the major obstacles. There's very few companies in the world that can do it, fortunately for us, but it's still a very poor business decision. There are other companies with expertise. No company in the world has that expertise. And what's interesting about all the expertise, what's interesting about the bank is their philosophy was, well, we need to become a big tech. But that's not what big techs do. They work with hundreds of specialists, smaller specialist companies. So it really makes no sense. It is a colossal waste of money. Good team, very successful company, but it really makes you wonder about the decisions being made when you see that. So number 7, top tier talent is scarce. We all know about the talent wars. Even though there's been an explosion in PhD programs, you still have a relatively few people worldwide that are moving the state of the art forward every year. So talent is still a major factor. Very few companies can afford it. The good news, systems like ours have become, the costs have really come down. And so you can adopt systems and you don't need to have the top tier talent. So we can hire, I know many of the world's leading AI scientists. We can expand our team, and all of our customers can benefit from it. It's a much more efficient way of doing it, obviously. So I'll jump over to 9 where we talked about NIH. Poorly designed DMS data management system. In fact, it's safe to say that almost none have a well-designed data management system, right? You got legacy systems. They were developed over time. There's very good data management for specific things within a large enterprise, but they aren't optimized for AI systems. So ours was developed from scratch, native form, and as far as I know, it's the world's most powerful system. And then finally, 3 little bare budgets that talks about not having trying to get the right budget for the right company. The good news, again, the price has really come down. We actually, to give you an idea, the first major prototype that we estimated on was way back in 2010, And for only part of a large enterprise, it was over $100 million. So back then we had to do some custom things that are now open source. There was actually some semiconductor work that we had to do. You could only do it on a supercomputer. Now, with tens of billions of dollars invested across the industry, our system is less than 1/10. So it would be single digit. Actually, it's closer to about 1/20th of the cost. And it's more than 10 times more powerful because of the innovation in the hardware and algorithmics and bandwidth, devices, etc. So, and we can extend to the devices, handheld devices, which opens up all the use cases that we want to go after. So the important part here is to get your budget right for your specific organization. And in most cases, it's a balance of, you have some custom internal work. So you have a balance between buying and building, and then infrastructure. And those are the most successful companies in the world in AI systems that I've spent time with, extensive amount of time with, have found a good balance between those. So I wanted to talk about the KOS Genesis project. That is, over the years, we, to really no surprise, we discovered really we needed to make the KOS really easy to use. And those that are familiar with machine learning and deep learning are well aware that, especially 10 years ago, 8 years ago, there weren't refined systems in place that were anything close to off-the-shelf software to make this easy to do and easy to adopt, which is where we need to be. So a couple of years ago, we developed the KOS Genesis Project, which we're doing now. We're sort of at the beginning stages of this and developing new the turnkey KOS project. The back end, a lot of the back end work is done now, and we're starting to work on the front end. But the Genesis project basically makes this so that the very first day that it's installed, the individual data modules learn, so that the organization can start, the individuals can upload some of their files, the system starts to read it, the knowledge starts to produce and gets populated across the entity so that a KLO can be achieved in a much more rapid fashion. So very important. And then finally, I just want to talk about our newest system. The KOS is 25 years old. It took about 15 years to become technically viable and tested at large scale in the very basic form. And then another several years before we could start doing things on devices, and all the different components came into place. So the synthetic genius machine is from the last 12 years of R&D since I've been in New Mexico. And I developed this while I was, after we moved to New Mexico from the Bay Area, I was a frequent visitor at the Santa Fe Institute, who I really got to know from 10 years earlier in our lab in Arizona and our networks. And I was a frequent visitor and contributor until about 2016. And we never worked on KYield at SFI, Santa Fe Institute, but just working with scientists from a variety of disciplines on advanced technology and emerging research from all over the world. It was a very good environment for me to work on, which I really appreciate. In fact, I've gifted them, this SFI, some of my equity, a small amount of my equity in KYield because of that contribution. And they treated me as a peer and didn't charge me anything. And so one of the things that came out of that era is this synthetic genius machine and knowledge creation system, which is patent pending. And this is symbolic reasoning, so it's symbolic AI. It's really at the confluence of advanced AI, human modeling after real geniuses, and also it's a prime candidate for quantum computing. So it's if I had to describe it, I would say it's sort of like the perfect application for quantum when it's done. So we still consider this an R&D, advanced R&D phase. However, the minimally viable product is actually doable now, and we're in the process of trying to raise quite a bit of money, where I'm actually anticipating and working on being the lead investor. So I'm intending to invest multiples at this new level with new investors of what I've already invested in KYield. So if you have any questions, this is me and my wife standing on top of Wheeler, which was the background behind me, same location, looking in a different direction. And our dog, Austin, who is, this is just this year in September, and he was over 12 years old, still made it to the top of, actually did a lot better than us. We're all in pretty good shape though. We're hanging in there, doing pretty well. And please reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.